After I gave birth, my father came to see me and asked, "Honey, isn't $6,000 a month enough? The money I've been sending you?" I said, "What are you talking about, Dad?" At his hard stare, my husband and mother-in-law turned pale. Then he. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and something else Nancy couldn't quite name. Maybe newness, maybe exhaustion. The machines beeped in a rhythm that had become background noise over the past 2 days, punctuated by the soft, irregular breathing of the tiny human sleeping in the clear bassinet beside her bed. Nancy Caldwell shifted against the thin pillow, wincing as pain radiated through her abdomen. The epidural had worn off hours ago, and every movement reminded her that her body had just done something extraordinary and brutal. Her daughter, 6 pounds, 3 ounces, unnamed as of yet because Evan kept saying they had time, slept on, oblivious to everything. The afternoon light came through the window at an angle that made Nancy squint. She'd been staring at that window for what felt like hours, watching the way the sun moved across the wall, marking time in a place where time felt both endless and compressed. Her father stood near that window now. Grant Caldwell was a tall man, broad-shouldered even in his 60s. With silver hair he kept neat and a face that usually radiated calm authority. But right now he looked uncomfortable. His hands were in his pockets, and he kept glancing toward the door as if measuring his escape route. Nancy knew that look. She'd seen it when he'd had to tell her that her mother's cancer had returned. When he'd had to explain why he couldn't make it to her college graduation because of emergency surgery. Grant Caldwell was not a man who enjoyed difficult conversations. "Honey," he said, his voice careful, measured, "I wanted to ask you something." Nancy turned her head, slowly, neck stiff. "Yeah, Dad." He cleared his throat. "The money I've been sending. $6,000 a month. Isn't that enough?" The words hung in the air. Nancy blinked, then blinked again. "Dad," she said slowly, her voice hoarse from 2 days of labor and very little sleep. "What money?" Grant's face changed. The discomfort became something sharper. Confusion, then understanding, then something that looked almost like anger. His eyes moved past her, fixing on a point beyond her bed. Nancy followed his gaze. Evan sat in the chair on the other side of the room, his phone in his hands. Her husband looked up slowly, his face carefully neutral. Beside him, his mother Lorna, perched on the edge of the second chair, her spine straight, her smile frozen in place. "You mean you don't know?" Grant said. It wasn't a question this time. The silence that followed felt thick enough to choke on. Nancy heard the machines beep, heard someone walk past in the hallway outside, heard her daughter make a small sound in her sleep. "Evan." Nancy's voice came out steadier than she felt. "What's he talking about?" Evan stood up, tucking his phone into his pocket. He was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, jeans and a polo shirt that had seen better days. His dark hair stuck up in the back where he'd been running his hands through it. "Nancy, this isn't the time." "What money?" She pushed herself more upright, ignoring the way her body screamed in protest. Grant stepped forward. His jaw was tight. "Evan contacted me 3 months after your wedding. Said you were overwhelmed, that the pregnancy was complicated, that there were medical expenses piling up, that you didn't want to ask me directly because of your pride." Nancy felt something cold settle in her chest. "He said you'd been crying at night," Grant continued, his voice hardening with each word, "that you were stressed about money, about the baby, about everything. So I sent $6,000 a month. Every month for the past 9 months. 9 months. The entire pregnancy." Nancy stared at her husband. "You told my father I was crying about money." "Nancy." "Did I cry about money, Evan?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You were stressed. I was trying to help. By lying to my father? I didn't lie. Did Nancy know about this money? Grant's voice cut through whatever excuse Evan was about to offer. Did you tell your wife that you contacted me? Evan's face flushed. She didn't need to know. She had enough to worry about. That's not an answer, Grant said. Nancy felt heat rising in her face. Not embarrassment, not shame, anger. Pure, clean anger that burned away the exhaustion and the pain and left something sharp and focused in its place. How much? She asked. Nancy, we can talk about this later. How much, Evan? He swallowed. 54,000. Total. The number sat in the air between them, like a living thing. Lorna stood up then, smoothing down her skirt. She was a small woman, compact and neat, with short gray hair and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. Grant, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Evan and I have been managing things so Nancy could focus on the baby. We didn't want to burden her with financial stress during such a delicate time. You. Grant turned his attention to Lorna. You were involved in this. I made a few phone calls, Lorna said, her voice pleasant, reasonable, just to check in, to make sure you understood how much Nancy needed support right now. She's always been so independent, you know, sometimes too independent for her own good. Nancy felt her hands curl into fists beneath the thin hospital blanket. Let me get this straight, Grant said, his voice dangerously quiet now. My daughter just gave birth. She's lying in a hospital bed. And you're telling me that for the past 9 months, you've been taking money from me under false pretenses and keeping it secret from her. We were protecting her, Evan said quickly. From what? Grant's question was sharp. From stress. From responsibility. From... Evan gestured vaguely at Nancy. She's always been intense about things. About control. About doing everything herself. We were trying to make things easier. That word. Intense. Nancy had heard it before. From Evan. From Lorna. Always said with that particular tone that made it sound like a diagnosis rather than a description. Get out, Nancy said quietly. Evan blinked. What? Both of you. Get out of my room. Nancy, you're being irrational. Get out. Her voice cracked on the last word, loud enough that her daughter startled awake and began to cry. The sound, sharp, insistent, newborn desperate, cut through everything else. Evan backed toward the door. Lorna picked up her purse with careful, deliberate movements. We'll talk about this when you're calmer, Lorna said, her voice still pleasant, still reasonable. Don't come back, Nancy said, reaching for her daughter, pulling the baby close despite the pain in her body. Not today. Not until I say so. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Grant stood frozen by the window. Nancy looked down at her crying daughter, at the tiny red face and the small fists waving in the air. She touched one finger to that miniature hand, felt the baby's fingers close around hers with surprising strength. Dad, she said, not looking up, tell me everything. Grant pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down heavily. He looked older suddenly, the lines around his eyes deeper than Nancy remembered. It started in January, he began, about a month after your wedding. Evan called me, said you'd been having a hard time adjusting to married life, that the pregnancy wasn't easy, that money was tight because you'd cut back your hours at work. Nancy kept her eyes on her daughter, who had stopped crying and was now making small, snuffling sounds against her chest. He was very convincing, Grant continued. Said you were proud, that you'd never ask for help directly, that you were worried about medical bills, about getting the nursery ready, about what would happen when the baby came, and you couldn't work at all. What did he ask for? Nothing at first. He just wanted me to know you were struggling. Then Lorna called a few days later, said she was worried about you, that you looked tired, that Evan was doing his best, but he was young and didn't make much money, and they didn't want you to suffer because of that. Nancy closed her eyes briefly. The manipulation was elegant, she had to admit. Two-pronged. Evan planting the seed, Lorna watering it. She suggested that maybe I could help, Grant said. Just for a while. Just until the baby came and things settled down. She made it sound like it was my idea. How much did you send the first time? 6,000. She said that would cover a month of expenses. Rent, utilities, groceries, medical copays. I set up an automatic transfer to Evan's account. His account, Nancy said. Not mine. He said it would be easier that way, that you didn't need to see it in your account and feel bad about taking money from me. Nancy laughed, a short, bitter sound that made her daughter startle. And you believed him? I believed you needed help. Grant's voice was tight. I believed my daughter was struggling and too proud to ask her father for support. I believed, he stopped, took a breath. I believed them. Did they ever send you proof? Receipts? Bills? Lorna sent me some things. Hospital statements. Utility bills. They looked real. Were they in my name? Grant was quiet for a long moment. No, they were in Evan's name. And that didn't seem strange to you? Nancy. Grant leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. I'm sorry. I should have talked to you directly. I should have asked. But they were very convincing, and he stopped again. I wanted to believe I was helping. I wanted to believe my daughter needed me. Nancy felt something twist in her chest. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, just a tired recognition of how easily people could be manipulated when they wanted to believe they were doing good. What do we know about where the money went? She asked. Nothing. I sent it to Evan's account every month. $54,000 over 9 months. Nancy did the math quickly. $6,000 a month. Her rent was $1,200. Utilities, maybe $200. Groceries, maybe $400 if they were being extravagant. That left over $3,000 a month unaccounted for. I need to see my bank statements, she said, and Evan's, and credit card records. Everything. Nancy. Now, Dad, before they have time to hide anything. Grant pulled out his phone. I'll call Tom. He's good with financial investigations. Who's Tom? My attorney. Nancy looked down at her daughter again. The baby's eyes were open now, dark blue and unfocused, staring at nothing and everything. She had Evan's nose, Nancy realized. That small, straight nose. The thought made her stomach turn. Dad, she said quietly, what else did Lorna tell you? Grant hesitated. Tell me. She said you were fragile, that the pregnancy hormones were making you emotional, that you'd been having panic attacks. He met Nancy's eyes. Were you having panic attacks? No. Were you fragile? What do you think? Grant's jaw tightened. I think I was an idiot. You were trying to help, Nancy said. They used that against you. That doesn't make me less of an idiot. Nancy shifted the baby in her arms, wincing at the movement. Her body hurt. Everything hurt. But the pain was becoming background noise, something distant and manageable compared to the rage building in her chest. I trusted him, she said. I married him. I let him. She stopped, swallowed. I let him convince me to quit my job early. He said I needed to rest, that stress wasn't good for the baby. I cut my hours in November, quit completely in December. He said he'd handle everything. And you believed him. I believed my husband, Nancy said, and the bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Grant stood up and walked back to the window. Outside, the parking lot was full of cars, people coming and going, visiting new babies and sick relatives, living their normal lives while Nancy's world cracked open. I'll fix this, Grant said without turning around. You can't fix this. I can make them give the money back. I can. Dad. Nancy waited until he looked at her. This isn't about the money. Then what's it about? Nancy looked down at her daughter, at this tiny person who was hers, who depended on her for everything, who had no idea what kind of family she'd just been born into. "It's about the fact that my husband lied to me," she said quietly, "that he and his mother conspired to keep me ignorant and dependent, that they took money from my father and made me look weak in the process, that her voice broke slightly. She cleared her throat, that they thought I was too fragile and emotional and intense to handle my own life." Grant crossed back to the bed. He put one large hand on Nancy's shoulder, careful not to jostle the baby. "What do you need?" he asked. "I need to go home. I need to see what else they've been lying about. Nancy stopped, took a breath. "I need to think. You just had a baby. You need to rest." "I'll rest when I know the truth." Grant looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll get the discharge paperwork started, and I'll call Tom." He walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Nancy," he said without turning around. "Yeah. You're not fragile. You're not emotional. You're not too intense." He looked back at her. "You're the strongest person I know. I should have remembered that." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Nancy sat alone in the quiet room with her unnamed daughter, and the sound of machines beeping, and the knowledge that everything she'd thought she knew about her marriage had been a carefully constructed lie. She looked down at the baby. "Your father," she said quietly, "is going to regret this." The baby yawned, a tiny, perfect O of a mouth. Nancy smiled grimly. "That's what I thought too." They arrived home 3 hours later. The house was a small 2-bedroom rental on the edge of Stillwater, with white siding and a front porch that Evan kept saying he'd fix up someday. Nancy had loved it when they first moved in. Loved the quiet street, the big oak tree in the front yard, the way morning light came through the kitchen window. Now she looked at it and felt nothing but cold calculation. Evan's truck was in the driveway. Nancy had texted him from the hospital, coming home. "Don't leave." He'd responded immediately. "Thank God. We need to talk about this calmly." She'd read that message 3 times, each time feeling her jaw clenched tighter. Grant pulled his car up behind the truck, blocking it in. Nancy noticed the detail and felt a flicker of appreciation. Her father might be sorry for being manipulated, but he wasn't stupid. "You want me to come in?" Grant asked. "No. Wait out here. If I'm not out in 20 minutes, come get me." "Nancy." 20 minutes, Dad." She got out of the car carefully, her body protesting every movement. The car seat with her sleeping daughter weighed what felt like 50 pounds, though it couldn't have been more than 15. Nancy carried it up the front steps, noting the peeling paint on the railing, the crack in the 3rd step that Evan had also promised to fix. The front door opened before she reached it. Evan stood in the doorway, his hair damp from a shower, wearing clean clothes now. He'd shaved, put on cologne. He smiled tentatively. "Hey," he said. "Welcome home." Nancy pushed past him without answering. The living room was clean, cleaner than it had been when she left for the hospital 2 days ago. The dishes were done. The floors were vacuumed. A vase of flowers, cheap grocery store carnations, sat on the coffee table. "I wanted everything to be nice," Evan said, following her inside. "For you and the baby." Nancy set the car seat down on the couch and straightened slowly, hand pressed to her abdomen. She looked at Evan, really looked at him. Dark hair, brown eyes, a face that was handsome in an unremarkable way. 28 years old, 2 years younger than her. They'd met at a coffee shop, started dating, gotten married 6 months later because Nancy had been pregnant and it had seemed like the right thing to do. Looking at him now, Nancy couldn't remember why she'd loved him, or if she ever had. "Where's the money?" she asked. Evan's smile faltered. "Nancy, please. Can we sit down and talk about this like adults?" "Where's the money, Evan?" "I used it for expenses. For bills." "For? Which bills?" "Show me." "What?" "Show me the bills. The receipts. The bank statements. Show me where $54,000 went." Evan ran his hand through his hair. It's all in the accounts. I can pull up the statements. Then pull them up. Nancy, you're being unreasonable. You just had a baby. You're tired. You're emotional. Say emotional one more time, Nancy said quietly. I dare you. Evan stopped, swallowed. I was trying to protect you. From what? From stress. From worrying about money. He gestured vaguely. You're always so intense about things. So controlling. I thought if I handled the finances, you could focus on the pregnancy and being healthy. There was that word again. Intense. Nancy took a step forward. Let me be clear about something. My father sent $54,000 to support his daughter during her pregnancy. You took that money without telling me. You lied to my father about my mental state. You conspired with your mother to keep me ignorant. That's not protection, Evan. That's control. That's manipulation. She paused. That's fraud. Evan's face went pale. It's not fraud. It's just we're married. What's his is mine, and what's mine is his. That's how marriage works. Not in Minnesota, it doesn't. We don't have community property here. That money was sent specifically for my medical expenses and living costs. Using it for anything else is theft. You're being dramatic. Show me the bank statements. Nancy. Show me the statements. Now. Evan stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room and pulled out his laptop. Nancy watched as he typed, his fingers shaking slightly on the keys. Here, he said, turning the screen toward her. Nancy limped over and looked at the screen. The bank account showed regular deposits of $6,000 from Grant Caldwell. It also showed regular withdrawals and payments. She scrolled through the transactions. Rent, $1,200. That checked out. Utilities, $150. Fine. Groceries, $300. Reasonable. Car payment, $450. That was Evan's truck. Credit card payment, $800. She didn't recognize the card number. Another credit card payment, $600. A payment to Rourke Holdings, LLC, $2,000. Nancy pointed at the screen. What's that? Evan shifted his weight. That's a family thing. My mom's business. Your mom's business. She needed some help getting it off the ground. Nancy scrolled further. The payment to Rourke Holdings appeared every single month. $2,000. 9 months. $18,000. You gave my father's money to your mother, Nancy said flatly. It was a loan. She's going to pay it back. With what? What business does Lorna run? Evan was quiet. Evan, what business? It's just she had some debts. From before. I was helping her pay them off. Nancy felt something cold settle in her stomach. You used my father's money to pay your mother's debts. She's family. We help family. I'm family, Nancy said. I'm your wife. I'm the mother of your child. And you helped your mother instead of telling me the truth. The baby started crying in her car seat. Nancy turned away from Evan and went to pick her up, moving carefully, ignoring the pain. Nancy, please. What else? She asked without turning around. What else did you lie about? I didn't lie. You told my father I was having panic attacks. You told him I was crying at night. You told him I was too proud to ask for help. Nancy bounced the baby gently, feeling the tiny body relax against her chest. Those were lies, Evan. What else? Evan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was defensive. I told him you wanted to quit your job, that it was your idea. But it wasn't. You agreed to it. After you told me every single day that work was too stressful for the baby. After you showed me articles about pregnancy complications and workplace stress. After your mother told me that real wives prioritize family over career. Nancy turned to face him. I agreed because you made me think I was being selfish if I didn't. That's not fair. What else? Nothing. That's everything. Nancy studied his face, saw the way his eyes slid away from hers, the way his jaw tightened. You're lying, she said. I'm not. I can tell when you're lying, Evan. You get this look. This, she gestured at his face. This tense thing with your mouth. What else did you do? Evan walked to the window and stared out at the street, where Grant's car was still parked, blocking the driveway. I put your credit cards in my name, he said finally. Nancy went very still. What? The credit cards. The ones we got after the wedding. I put them in my name only. I thought, he turned to face her. I thought it would be simpler. One person managing the credit, making sure we didn't overspend. Those cards I've been using, Nancy said slowly. The ones I thought were joint accounts. They're in your name only. Yes. Which means I have no credit history for the past year. No payment history. No nothing. I've been making the payments. That's not the point. Nancy's voice rose, making the baby startle and begin crying again. She forced herself to speak more quietly, to rock the baby gently. The point is that you've been systematically removing my financial independence. You got my father to send money without telling me. You convinced me to quit my job. You put the credit cards in your name only. You, she stopped. What else? Nancy. What else? Evan's shoulders slumped. The lease. I signed a new lease last month. Just in my name. This house, our house, is only in your name now. I thought. What did you think, Evan? That you'd just slowly take control of every aspect of my life? That you'd make it so I had no job, no credit, no legal claim to where I lived? That you'd make me completely dependent on you? I was protecting you. Nancy laughed, a harsh, broken sound. No, you were trapping me. You and your mother were systematically trapping me, and you were using my father's money to do it. She walked to the couch, sat down carefully, still holding the crying baby. Her body hurt. Her heart hurt worse. I want access to all the accounts, she said. Every bank account, every credit card, every bill, every statement. By tonight. Nancy. All of them. Or I call my father's attorney right now. Evan stared at her. You don't trust me. Nancy met his eyes. I don't know my own husband. So no, I don't trust you. You're being paranoid. Passwords, Evan. For everything. By tonight. And if I say no? Nancy pulled out her phone with one hand, still holding the baby with the other. Then I make a call, and we find out whether what you did counts as fraud or just regular lying. Want to take that chance? They stared at each other across the living room. Fine, Evan said finally. I'll write them down. No, you'll sit next to me and log into every account while I watch. Right now. Evan's jaw tightened. You're really going to do this? Right after having our baby? You're going to interrogate me like some kind of criminal. Yes, Nancy said, because my husband lied to me. My husband and his mother took money from my father and used it for their own purposes. My husband has been controlling my finances without my knowledge. So yes, Evan, I'm going to interrogate you, and you're going to answer, because the alternative is that I leave right now and you never see your daughter without a lawyer present. The words hung in the air. Evan looked at the baby, then at Nancy, then back at the baby. Something shifted in his expression. Fear, maybe. Or calculation. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, I'll show you everything. He sat down on the couch, keeping space between them, and opened his laptop again. Nancy watched as he logged into accounts, as he pulled up statements, as he showed her numbers that made her stomach turn. Debt she didn't know about, payments to his mother she'd never authorized, purchases she'd never made. With every screen, every password, every revealed secret, Nancy felt something inside her grow colder and harder and more resolved. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't protection. This was control, deliberate and systematic. And Nancy Caldwell was done being controlled. That night, they slept in the same bed with their backs turned to each other. Nancy lay awake, staring at the wall, listening to Evan's breathing shift and change as he pretended to sleep. The baby was in her bassinet beside the bed, also pretending. Nancy had learned quickly that newborns didn't really sleep so much as cycle through states of not quite wakefulness. Every time the baby made a sound, Nancy's body tensed, ready to respond. But she didn't move, didn't reach over, didn't acknowledge Evan's presence less than 2 feet away. She'd spent 3 hours going through accounts. 3 hours of watching Evan log into banks and credit cards and payment systems. 3 hours of watching numbers scroll by that told a story of manipulation and deceit. Her father's money had gone to pay off Lorna's credit card debt, to make car payments on Evan's truck, to fund a business that didn't seem to exist beyond a bank account. Very little of it had gone toward Nancy's medical expenses or the baby's needs. Evan had tried to explain, had tried to justify, but Nancy had stopped listening after the first hour. The numbers spoke louder than his excuses ever could. Now, in the darkness, she calculated. She had no job, no credit cards in her own name, no lease. Her savings account, the one she'd had before the marriage, had $3,000 in it. Enough for maybe a month of expenses if she was careful. Not nearly enough for long-term independence. Her father could help, would help. But Nancy didn't want to be dependent on anyone anymore. Didn't want to owe anyone. Didn't want to be in a position where someone else could control her finances ever again. The baby made a small sound, not quite crying, just a whisper of need. Nancy got up slowly, every muscle protesting. She picked up her daughter and carried her to the chair in the corner, settling in to nurse. The baby latched on immediately, and Nancy felt the familiar pull and release, the strange intimacy of feeding another human from her own body. In the dim light from the street lamp outside, she studied her daughter's face. This person who was hers. This person who depended on her for everything. "I won't let them do this to you," Nancy whispered. "I won't let them teach you that it's normal for people who love you to lie to you, to control you, to make you think you're too weak to handle your own life." The baby kept nursing, oblivious. "Your father is a liar," Nancy continued quietly. "Your grandmother is a manipulator, and I'm going to make sure you know that. Not to poison you against them, but so you understand that family doesn't mean accepting abuse. That love doesn't mean accepting control." She paused, adjusted the baby's position. "And maybe," she said, "maybe your father will change. Maybe he'll realize what he did was wrong. Maybe he'll spend the rest of his life making it up to us." Nancy looked toward the bed, where Evan's shape was a dark outline against the sheets. "But I'm not going to wait around to find out," she finished. Morning came gray and cold. Nancy woke to the baby crying and Evan gone. His side of the bed was cold. The shower was running. She changed the baby's diaper, noting with grim satisfaction that she'd packed the diaper bag herself at the hospital. At least this was one thing Evan couldn't claim credit for managing. When Evan emerged from the bathroom, dressed for work in khakis and a button-down, Nancy was sitting in the living room with the baby. "I have to go in today," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I already took 2 days off." "Fine. We can talk more tonight, after we've both had some rest." "Sure." He hovered near the door, keys in hand. "Nancy." "Go to work, Evan." He left. Nancy waited until she heard his truck start, heard it pull out of the driveway. Then she called her father. "I need you to come get me," she said when he answered. "Today. As soon as possible." "What happened?" "Nothing new. Nancy looked around the living room, at the clean surfaces and the grocery store flowers and the carefully managed appearance of a normal home. I can't stay here. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Nancy packed quickly. Just the essentials, clothes for her and the baby, toiletries, documents she'd grabbed from Evan's desk the night before while he was in the bathroom, birth certificates, social security cards, the hospital paperwork. She left the flowers, the clean dishes, the vacuumed floors. She left her wedding ring on the bedside table. Grant arrived exactly 30 minutes later. He didn't ask questions, just helped her carry bags to the car, his face set in hard lines. They were pulling out of the driveway when Evan's truck turned onto the street. He'd come back, maybe forgotten something, maybe suspicious, maybe. Nancy didn't care. She watched in the side mirror as Evan's truck stopped in the middle of the street. As Evan got out and stood there, staring after them, she didn't wave, didn't look back. She just held her daughter and let her father drive them away. Grant's house was a large colonial on 3 acres outside Stillwater. Nancy had grown up here, had run through these rooms as a child, had brought Evan here for Sunday dinners back when she'd thought he was someone she could trust. Now she sat in the guest bedroom, her old bedroom, though Grant had redecorated years ago, and fed her daughter and tried to figure out what came next. Her phone buzzed constantly, text after text from Evan. Where are you? Nancy, please come home. We need to talk about this. You can't just leave with my daughter. This is kidnapping. Nancy read that last one twice, then deleted it. She'd looked it up already. Minnesota law was clear. Without a custody agreement or divorce decree, either parent could take their child anywhere. It wasn't kidnapping. It was parenting. She didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, she opened her laptop, her old laptop, the one from before the marriage, the one she'd kept at her father's house, and started researching divorce attorneys. She needed someone good, someone tough, someone who specialized in financial misconduct in marriages. She found 3 possibilities, made notes, composed careful emails. Then she searched for information about fraud charges, about financial exploitation, about what it meant when someone took money under false pretenses. The law was murkier than she'd hoped. Money given to a family member was hard to classify as fraud, even if the circumstances were misrepresented, unless there was clear documentation, unless there was proof of intent to deceive. Nancy thought about the texts Lorna had sent her father, about the phone calls, about the carefully constructed story of a struggling, emotional daughter. She needed those records. She called Grant. Dad, do you have copies of the messages you got from Evan and Lorna? The ones about me. Some of them. The texts I still have. The calls. I don't know if I have recordings. Can you forward me everything you have? And can you write down what you remember from the phone calls? As much detail as possible. Nancy, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that what they did might be illegal. I'm thinking that even if it's not, I want a record of it. I want proof. Grant was quiet for a moment. You're planning to file charges. I'm planning to have the option. This could get ugly. Dad, Nancy said, looking at her sleeping daughter. It's already ugly. Lorna showed up that evening. Nancy was in the kitchen, heating up soup that Grant had made when she heard the doorbell. Then Grant's voice, firm and unwelcoming. Then Lorna's voice, higher, insistent. I need to see my granddaughter, Lorna was saying as Nancy walked into the front hall. You need to leave, Grant responded. That's my son's child. I have rights. Actually, Nancy said, stepping forward, you don't. Lorna turned. She was dressed carefully as always, slacks and a cardigan, tasteful jewelry, her hair neat. Her expression was pleasant, reasonable, concerned. Nancy, sweetheart, she said, moving forward with her arms outstretched. Nancy held up one hand. Don't. Lorna stopped, dropped her arms. Her smile faltered just slightly before reasserting itself. I came to check on you, Lorna said, and to see the baby. Evan said you left this morning without explanation. He's worried sick. Evan knows exactly why I left. Because of a misunderstanding? Because of a simple miscommunication about money? Lorna shook her head. Nancy, marriages have rough patches, especially in the beginning, especially with a new baby. You can't just run home to Daddy every time things get hard. Nancy felt her jaw tighten. You stole from my father. I did no such thing. You called him multiple times. You told him I was having panic attacks. You told him I was crying about money. You convinced him to send thousands of dollars to help me. And then you took that money for yourself. Lorna's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I took nothing. The money went to Evan, to help support his family. That's what good parents do. We help our children when they're struggling. Except we weren't struggling. Not until you and Evan made sure I had no job and no access to money. You chose to quit your job, Lorna said, her voice still pleasant, still reasonable. You chose to let Evan handle the finances. Those were your choices, Nancy. After you spent months convincing me I was too stressed to work, too intense to manage money. Nancy stopped, took a breath. You manipulated me. You manipulated my father. You committed fraud. That's a serious accusation. Lorna's smile was gone now. You might want to think very carefully before making accusations you can't prove. I have Grant's bank records showing every transfer. I have text messages. I have phone logs. I have Evan's account statements showing where the money actually went. None of which proves anything illegal, Lorna said smoothly. A son asked his father-in-law for help. A mother supported her son. A wife got overwhelmed after having a baby. These things happen, Nancy. They're not crimes. Maybe not, Nancy admitted, but they're enough for a divorce. And they're enough to make sure Evan never has unsupervised access to our daughter. Lorna's composure cracked just slightly. You wouldn't. Watch me. You're being vindictive. You're letting hormones and paranoia destroy your family. Nancy stepped forward, close enough that she could see the calculation in Lorna's eyes, the way she was measuring, evaluating, figuring out her next move. My family, Nancy said quietly, is me and my daughter, not Evan, not you. You made sure of that when you decided lying to my father was more important than having an honest relationship with your son's wife. I was protecting my son. From what? From having a wife with her own job, her own money, her own autonomy? What was so threatening about me being independent that you had to systematically destroy it? Lorna drew herself up. Marriage isn't a democracy, Nancy. A woman needs guidance, structure, someone to help her make good decisions. Someone like you? Someone with more experience, more wisdom, someone who understands that a man needs to be the head of his household. There it was, the real belief underneath all the pleasant smiles and reasonable tones. Nancy laughed, actually laughed. You really think that, don't you? You really believe that men should control their wives, that women need to be managed. I believe, Lorna said carefully, that traditional family structures exist for a reason. That some things are true regardless of what modern feminism tries to tell us. That a strong man and a supportive woman make the best foundation for raising children. Then it's a good thing, Nancy said, that my daughter won't be learning that from you. Lorna's eyes narrowed. You can't keep me from my granddaughter. I can, and I will, until you admit what you did, until you apologize, until you give back every penny you stole from my father. I stole nothing. Then explain to me, Nancy said, her voice rising now, where $18,000 of my father's money went. Explain to me why it went to an LLC in your name. Explain to me why you called my father and lied about my mental state so you could get your hands on his money. I made some phone calls. I expressed concern. That's not lying. You told him I was having panic attacks. I wasn't. That's lying. You told him I was crying about money. I wasn't. That's lying. You made him think his daughter was suffering so you could pay off your debts. That's not just lying. That's fraud. Lorna's hands curled into fists at her sides. The pleasant mask was completely gone now, replaced with something harder, meaner. You ungrateful little, she stopped herself, took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled, cold. I tried to help you. I tried to guide you, but you're too stubborn, too proud, too convinced you're smarter than everyone else. Well, let me tell you something, Nancy. Men like Evan don't grow on trees. You'll never find another man willing to put up with your intensity, your constant need to control everything. Get out, Grant said, stepping forward. His voice was quiet, but carried a weight that made Lorna stop mid-sentence. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Grant moved between Nancy and Lorna. I understand that you and your son lied to me, that you took my money under false pretenses, that you manipulated my daughter into a position of dependency so you could control her. I understand all of it, Lorna, and I want you out of my house. Lorna stared at him. You'll regret this. When Nancy realizes she can't do this alone. When she comes crawling back because she can't handle a baby by herself. When Evan finds someone else because his wife abandoned him. Out, Grant said, pointing to the door. Lorna looked at Nancy one more time. Her expression was calculating, measuring. Then she turned and walked to the door with careful, controlled steps. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. This isn't over, she said without looking back. Yes, Nancy replied. It is. The door closed. Nancy stood in the front hall, shaking slightly, her hands clenched at her sides. Grant put a hand on her shoulder. You okay? No, Nancy said, but I will be. The text messages from Evan intensified that night. My mother says you threatened her. You can't keep my daughter from me. I'll file for custody. You're being irrational. Come home and we'll work this out. Nancy, please. You're ruining everything. Nancy read them all, deleted them all, didn't respond. Instead, she sat in her old bedroom with her daughter and made lists. Things she needed to do. File for divorce, establish separate bank account, get copies of all financial records, find employment secure, housing document, everything. Things she knew for certain. Evan lied, Lorna, lied, neither of them, would stop neither of them, would apologize, neither of them, thought they'd done anything wrong. Things she felt. Angry, betrayed, humiliated, determined, free. That last one surprised her. But sitting there in her father's house, away from Evan and his explanations and Lorna's manipulation, Nancy realized she felt lighter than she had in months. The constant low-grade anxiety of trying to please Evan was gone. The pressure to be less intense, less controlling, less herself, gone. The need to manage Lorna's criticism and correction, gone. She was alone with her daughter in her father's guest room, unemployed and technically homeless, and she felt more at peace than she had since her wedding day. That told her everything she needed to know. Her phone buzzed again. If you don't respond, I'm coming over there. Nancy sighed and typed a response. Don't. I'll contact you through my attorney when I'm ready. 3 dots appeared immediately. Disappeared. Appeared again. You're hiring an attorney? Yes. Nancy, you're being ridiculous. We can work this out ourselves. No, we can't. You're going to destroy our family over money? Nancy stared at that message for a long time. Then she typed, You destroyed our family when you lied to me, when you manipulated my father, when you systematically removed every bit of my independence. I'm just making it official. She blocked his number before he could respond. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange kind of limbo. Nancy focused on the baby, on feeding schedules and sleep patterns, and the tiny daily changes that marked new life. She focused on her body healing, on the pain gradually lessening, on being able to move without wincing. And she focused on building her case. Grant's attorney, Tom, was a man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for being thorough. He met with Nancy in Grant's study, spreading documents across the desk and asking questions in a calm, methodical way that made Nancy feel like maybe this wasn't hopeless. "The fraud angle is tricky," Tom said, reviewing the bank statements, "but not impossible. If we can prove that Lorna and Evan knowingly misrepresented the situation to induce Grant to give them money, we might have a case." "I have the text messages," Nancy said. "The ones where Lorna told my father I was having panic attacks." "Were you diagnosed with panic attacks?" "No." "Were you being treated for anxiety?" "No." "Good. That helps." Tom made notes on his legal pad. "What about the money that went to Rourke Holdings? Do we know what that was for?" Evan said it was to pay off Lorna's debts. "Can we prove that?" Nancy pulled out another set of papers, printouts she'd made from Evan's laptop before she left. Credit card statements in Lorna's name, showing balances being paid down month by month, corresponding exactly with the transfers to Rourke Holdings. Tom smiled. "You're thorough." "I'm angry," Nancy corrected. "That works too." They spent another hour going through details. Tom explained that while criminal fraud might be hard to prove, civil fraud was more achievable. They could file a lawsuit to recover the money. They could subpoena records. They could make Evan and Lorna's lives complicated enough that they might settle just to make it go away. "But here's what you need to understand," Tom said, leaning back in his chair. "If you do this, if you file civil charges, it's going to get ugly. Evan and Lorna will fight back. They'll try to paint you as an unstable new mother. They'll argue that the money was a gift, not fraud. They'll make it about your character instead of their actions." "Let them," Nancy said. "You sure? Because once you start this, there's no easy way to stop." Nancy looked at Tom, thought about Evan's texts, about Lorna's visit, about the systematic way they'd tried to control her life. "I'm sure," she said. "The divorce papers were filed 3 weeks after the baby was born. Nancy named her daughter Grace, after her mother, who had died when Nancy was 12, who had been strong and independent and never let anyone tell her what she should be. Evan was served at work. He called immediately, somehow getting past the blocked number. Nancy let it go to voicemail. "You filed for divorce?" His voice was shrill, disbelieving, without even trying to work things out, without counseling or anything. "Nancy, you're making a huge mistake. You're throwing away our family because you're angry about a misunderstanding. Please, please call me back. We can fix this." Nancy deleted the voicemail. The next message came an hour later. Lorna this time. "Nancy, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but you're hurting Evan terribly. He loves you. He's trying so hard to be a good father, and you're keeping his daughter from him. That's cruel. That's selfish. I thought better of you." Delete. Then Evan again. "Fine. If you want to do this the hard way, we'll do it the hard way. My attorney says I have rights, that you can't just take Grace and keep her from me. You'll hear from my lawyer." Nancy saved that message. Tom had told her to save anything that could be considered threatening or manipulative, anything that showed Evan's mindset, anything that could help their case. 2 days later, Evan's attorney sent a letter demanding immediate visitation rights. Nancy's attorney responded with a proposal. Supervised visits only, pending the resolution of financial fraud allegations. Evan rejected it. He wanted unsupervised overnight visits. He wanted Grace every other weekend and every Wednesday evening. He wanted to introduce Grace to his new girlfriend. Apparently he'd moved on quickly. Nancy read that detail and felt nothing. No jealousy, no hurt, just a kind of grim satisfaction that she'd been right to leave when she did. Her attorney countered with a more detailed proposal. Evan could have supervised daytime visits only until he repaid the misappropriated funds and attended parenting classes. No overnight visits until Grace was older. No introduction to romantic partners until the relationship was stable and established. Evan's attorney called it unreasonable. The legal battle escalated. A month after the divorce filing, Grant's accountant finished his analysis. Of the $54,000 sent to Evan, less than $5,000 had gone toward Nancy's actual medical expenses or baby-related costs. The rest had been distributed as follows: $18,000 to pay off Lorna's credit card debt, $12,000 in car payments for Evan's truck, $8,000, $500 in personal purchases, clothes, electronics, dinners out, $4,000, $200 in cash withdrawals, no record of use, $6,000, $300 in miscellaneous payments that couldn't be traced. Grant stared at the report in silence for a long time. "They stole from me," he said finally. "They looked me in the eye, lied about my daughter's well-being, and stole from me." "Yes," Nancy said quietly, "and they didn't think there would be consequences." "No, they didn't." Grant looked up at her. "What do you want to do?" Nancy had been thinking about that question for weeks, had been weighing options, considering outcomes, calculating costs. "I want them to face consequences," she said. "Real ones. Not just divorce. Not just paying back money. I want them to understand that what they did was wrong. That lying and manipulation and financial abuse have real repercussions." "You want to press criminal charges?" "Yes." Grant nodded slowly. "Tom says we have enough for a civil case. But criminal, that's harder to prove. The district attorney might not even take it." "We won't know unless we try." "Nancy," Grant said gently, "are you sure? Because this path, it's going to consume months of your life. It's going to mean lawyers and depositions and possibly a trial. It's going to mean reliving all of this over and over again. And there's no guarantee we'll win." Nancy looked at Grace, asleep in her bassinet near the window, 6 weeks old now, getting bigger every day, learning to smile, to track faces with her eyes, to grasp at toys. "I'm sure," Nancy said, "because if I don't do this, they'll do it to someone else. Evan will meet another woman, and he'll use the same tactics. Lorna will find another target, and they'll think they got away with it because no one held them accountable. So this is about more than just you. This is about the fact that people like them rely on their victims being too tired or too scared or too embarrassed to fight back." Nancy met her father's eyes. "I'm not too tired. I'm not too scared. And I'm not embarrassed. I'm angry, and I'm going to make sure that anger matters." Grant smiled, a small, proud smile. "Your mother would have said the same thing." "I know." They filed a criminal complaint the next day. Tom worked with the district attorney's office to present the evidence, the false statements, the misappropriated funds, the systematic deception. The DA agreed to investigate. 2 weeks later, Evan and Lorna were each charged with 1 count of felony theft by false representation and 1 count of fraudulent misrepresentation. Nancy got the news while feeding Grace. She sat very still for a moment, feeling something shift in her chest. It was really happening. The consequences were real. Her phone buzzed. Evan, somehow calling from a new number. She answered. "You destroyed my life," he said without preamble. "I'm facing criminal charges because of you. I could go to prison. My mother could go to prison. And for what? For trying to help you." "For lying," Nancy said calmly. "For fraud. For financial abuse. I never abused you." "You systematically removed my financial independence. You lied to my father. You hid money. You put credit cards and leases in only your name. You made me quit my job. You controlled every aspect of my life while pretending it was for my own good. That's abuse, Evan. You're crazy. I'm done listening to you tell me what I am." Nancy's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm done with your excuses and your manipulation and your mother's toxic beliefs about what wives should be. You made choices, bad choices, and now you get to live with the consequences. You can't do this to me." "I'm not doing anything to you. The law is. The system is. Because what you did was illegal, Evan. Not just wrong. Illegal. She hung up, blocked the new number, went back to feeding her daughter. The preliminary hearing happened on a cold Tuesday in November. Nancy sat in the courtroom with Grant and Tom, watching as Evan and Lorna were arraigned on felony charges. They both pleaded not guilty. Lorna wore a navy suit, her hair perfect, her face composed. She looked like a respectable woman being falsely accused, and Nancy could see the strategy immediately, the sympathy play, the confusion. How could anyone think this sweet grandmother would commit fraud? Evan looked worse. He'd lost weight. His suit didn't fit properly. His eyes were red-rimmed and angry. When he saw Nancy, he stared at her with such hatred that she felt a chill run down her spine. Good, she thought. Let him be angry. Let him feel what I felt. The hearing was brief. The charges were formally presented. Bail was set low because neither defendant was considered a flight risk. A trial date was scheduled for February. As they filed out of the courtroom, Lorna approached Nancy in the hallway. "You look well," she said pleasantly, as if they were meeting for coffee. "How's the baby?" Nancy stared at her. "Don't talk to me. I'm just trying to be civil. For Grace's sake. She is my granddaughter, after all." "She's the granddaughter of a woman who committed fraud." Lorna's smile never wavered. "You know, when this is all over, when the jury finds us not guilty, because that's what will happen, you're going to feel very foolish. You're going to realize you destroyed your family for nothing." "My family is fine," Nancy said. "It's your family that's facing prison time." "We'll see," Lorna said softly. "We'll see who still has a family when this is done." She walked away before Nancy could respond. The months between arraignment and trial were strange. Nancy settled into a routine with Grace, learned the rhythms of infant care, slowly regained her strength. She applied for jobs, carefully, selectively looking for positions that would allow flexibility for a single mother. She found one at a small nonprofit, doing grant writing and fundraising. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough. And more importantly, her boss was a mother herself who understood about doctor's appointments and sick days and the complicated logistics of childcare. Nancy started work when Grace was 4 months old. Grant paid for daycare, an expense Nancy promised herself she'd repay once the divorce was final and the lawsuit was settled. She rebuilt her credit, opening cards in her own name. She saved money. She looked at apartments, planning for the day when she'd move out of her father's house and into a place that was truly hers. And she prepared for trial. Tom walked her through what to expect, the questions she'd be asked, the way Evan's attorney would try to make her look vindictive and emotional, the way they'd paint her as an unstable new mother who overreacted to a family disagreement. "They're going to come at you hard," Tom warned. "They're going to say the money was a gift, that Grant gave it willingly, that you're just upset because your marriage failed and you're looking for someone to blame." "Let them," Nancy said. "I have the truth." "The truth doesn't always win." "Then we'll make sure it does." In January, Evan's attorney made a settlement offer. Drop the criminal charges and the civil lawsuit, and Evan would agree to generous child support and shared custody. Nancy refused. The offer came back twice more, each time with better terms. More money, more custody concessions. Finally, an offer that included Evan and Lorna both admitting wrongdoing in writing and repaying the full amount with interest. Nancy considered that one, discussed it with Tom and Grant, weighed the certainty of settlement against the risk of trial. "If you settle," Tom said, "it's over. You get the money back. You get an admission. You get closure. But they don't go on trial. They don't face potential prison time. They get to walk away with a fine and an apology. And if we go to trial, we might win. We might lose. We might get a conviction that gets overturned on appeal. We might spend years in court for nothing." Tom paused. "But if we win, if we really win, they go on record as convicted felons. They do time. Maybe not much, but some. and they carry that conviction for the rest of their lives. Nancy thought about Lorna's smile in the courthouse, about her certainty that she'd done nothing wrong, about the way she'd tried to control Nancy's life and would undoubtedly try to control someone else's if given the chance. "We go to trial," Nancy said. The trial began on a Monday in February, almost a year after Grace was born. Nancy sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery, Grace with a babysitter back at Grant's house. She'd decided early on that she wouldn't bring her daughter to this, wouldn't let Grace's first year be colored by courtrooms and criminal charges. The prosecutor was a woman named Patricia Reynolds, mid-40s, with short dark hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. She'd told Nancy at their first meeting that she hated fraud cases. They were complicated, hard to prove, and juries often found them boring. But she hated people who took advantage of family more. Patricia's opening statement was clear and methodical. She laid out the timeline: Evan contacting Grant shortly after the wedding, Lorna following up with phone calls, the regular transfers of money, the false statements about Nancy's mental state and financial situation, the discovery that the money had been misused. "This is not a case about family helping family," Patricia told the jury. "This is a case about deliberate deception for financial gain. The defendants took advantage of a father's love for his daughter and used it to steal over $50,000. And they thought they'd get away with it because victims like Grant Caldwell and Nancy Caldwell often don't press charges against family. But these victims did, and now the defendants have to answer for their choices." Evan's attorney was a man named Richard Carpenter, expensive-looking, confident. His opening statement painted a different picture: a young couple struggling with pregnancy complications, a concerned mother trying to help her son, a generous father-in-law who gave money willingly and was now being manipulated by an angry daughter into claiming fraud. "Marriages end," Richard told the jury, "and when they do, people get hurt. People get angry. People look for someone to blame. Nancy Caldwell is looking for someone to blame for her failed marriage, and she's chosen her ex-husband and his mother. But wanting money from your father-in-law to help with medical bills isn't fraud. Accepting that money isn't theft. And trying to protect your pregnant wife from financial stress isn't a crime." Nancy sat very still, watching the jury watch Richard, wondering if they believed him. The prosecution's case took 3 days. Grant testified first, walking through the timeline of contact, the requests for money, the assurances that Nancy needed help. He was a good witness, calm, factual, impossible to rattle on cross-examination. "Did you give this money willingly?" Patricia asked. "I did." "Would you have given it if you'd known the truth? If you'd known Nancy wasn't having panic attacks? That she wasn't crying about money? That the majority of it would go to pay off Lorna Rourke's credit card debt?" "No," Grant said firmly. "I would not." On cross-examination, Richard tried to suggest Grant was being manipulated by Nancy. That father and daughter had concocted this story together after the marriage failed. "Isn't it true," Richard asked, "that you're upset your daughter got divorced?" "I'm upset my daughter was lied to." "But you paid for the wedding. You introduced her to Evan. You encouraged the relationship." "I did, and I was wrong. I didn't see what he really was." "Or maybe," Richard suggested, "you're just seeing what your daughter wants you to see now." "I'm seeing bank statements," Grant replied evenly. "I'm seeing text messages. I'm seeing documentation of where my money went. That's not manipulation. That's evidence." Nancy testified on the second day. Patricia walked her through the marriage, the pregnancy, the discovery at the hospital. Nancy kept her voice steady, her answers factual. She didn't cry, didn't show anger, just laid out what happened, step by step. "Did you know your father was sending money?" Patricia asked. "No." "Did you ask your father for money?" "No." "Did you tell Evan you wanted him to ask your father for money?" "No. I didn't even know Evan had contacted my father until after Grace was born." "And when you discovered the truth, What did you do? I left. I took my daughter and I left. Why? Nancy looked at the jury. Because I realized my husband had been lying to me about money, about my father, about our finances. Because I realized he and his mother had been systematically removing my financial independence. Because I couldn't trust him anymore. On cross-examination, Richard tried to make Nancy look emotional, vindictive, controlling. Isn't it true, he asked, that you have a history of being, how did your husband describe it, intense about things? Evan called me intense when I asked questions he didn't want to answer. That's not what I asked. Are you intense? Controlling? Do you have a need to manage every detail? I'm thorough, Nancy said. I pay attention. That's not the same as being controlling. You refused to let Evan manage the finances. After I discovered he'd been lying about them, yes. You filed for divorce without trying counseling. I filed for divorce after discovering fraud. You're keeping his daughter from him. I'm protecting my daughter from someone who lies. Richard's expression hardened. You're angry, aren't you, Ms. Caldwell? Angry that your marriage failed. Angry that you had to move back in with your father. Angry that you're a single mother. And you're taking that anger out on my client. Nancy met his eyes, kept her voice level. I'm angry that someone I trusted lied to me. Yes, but this isn't about anger. This is about fraud, about false representation, about taking money under false pretenses. Evan and Lorna made choices. This trial is about those choices. The defense case began on day 4. Evan testified first. He was nervous, stumbling over words, his hands shaking slightly. His attorney walked him through a version of events where everything was a misunderstanding. He'd contacted Grant out of concern, not malice. He'd accepted the money because Nancy was stressed and he wanted to protect her. He'd used some of it for household expenses, and yes, maybe some had gone to his mother, but that was just helping family. I never meant to deceive anyone, Evan said, looking at the jury with what Nancy assumed was supposed to be earnest regret. I was trying to be a good husband, a good son. I made mistakes, but they weren't crimes. On cross-examination, Patricia destroyed him. You told Grant that Nancy was having panic attacks. True or false? She was stressed. True or false, Mr. Rourke? She wasn't diagnosed, but... So false. You lied. I didn't lie, You told Grant that Nancy was crying about money. True or false? She was worried. Was she crying about money? No, but... So you lied. I was expressing concern. By lying. Patricia pulled up bank records on the screen behind her. $54,000 came into your account from Grant Caldwell. How much of that went to Nancy's medical expenses? I don't know exactly. The prosecution's accountant reviewed your records. He found $4,700 and change. Does that sound right? Evan shifted in his seat. Maybe. I didn't keep perfect records. And the rest? $18,000 to pay off your mother's debts? $12,000 for your truck payments? $8,000 for personal purchases. We had expenses. Were those Nancy's expenses or yours? They were family expenses. Did Nancy know about them? No, but... Did Nancy approve them? She didn't need to approve. Because you kept her in the dark. Because you made sure she had no access to the money her father sent specifically for her benefit. Because you lied to her the way you lied to her father. I was trying to protect her. By stealing from her, Patricia said quietly. Richard objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. Lorna testified on day 5. She was better than Evan. More composed, more articulate. She explained that she'd been concerned about her son's wife, that she'd reached out to Grant as one parent to another, that she'd accepted some help from Evan because she was struggling financially, and that's what families do. I never asked Grant for money directly, she said. I just expressed concern for Nancy. If he chose to help, that was his decision. You called him multiple times, Patricia pointed out, to check in, to see how Nancy was doing. And in those calls, you told him Nancy was having anxiety issues. I said I was concerned about her mental health. Any mother would be. Did you have any training in mental health? Any qualifications to diagnose anxiety? I didn't diagnose anything. I just expressed concern. Concern based on what? On what Evan told me. So you were passing along false information that Evan gave you. I was expressing valid concern based on what my son told me was happening. Patricia pulled up bank records, and the $18,000 that Evan transferred to Rourke Holdings, that was your company, correct? Yes. What does Rourke Holdings do? It manages some properties. Which properties? Lorna hesitated. It's more of a financial holding company. A holding company for what? For various assets. Or, Patricia said, a bank account you created to receive payments from your son, who was using money fraudulently obtained from Grant Caldwell to pay off your credit card debts. Objection, Richard said. Sustained. Rephrase, Ms. Reynolds. Where did the $18,000 go, Ms. Rourke? Lorna's jaw tightened. It was used to manage debts. Your debts? Yes. Credit card debts? Yes. Debts you'd accumulated before your son got married? Yes. So you used money that Grant Caldwell sent to help his daughter, money obtained through false statements about Nancy's mental health, to pay off your personal credit card bills. I was helping my son manage his household by taking $18,000 for yourself. It was a loan. Did you pay it back? Silence. Did you pay back a single dollar of that $18,000? I've been making payments. To Evan. Not directly, but... So no, you took $18,000 and never paid it back. Lorna's composure cracked. I'm his mother. He wanted to help me. With money that wasn't his, Patricia said. With money obtained by lying to Nancy's father. With money that was supposed to help Nancy through her pregnancy, not fund your lifestyle. It wasn't like that. Then tell us what it was like, Ms. Rourke. Tell us how lying to Grant, manipulating Nancy, and taking money under false pretenses was somehow okay because you're family. Lorna couldn't answer. Closing arguments happened on day 6. Richard gave a passionate defense of family loyalty, of misunderstandings, of young couples struggling and parents trying to help. He painted Nancy as vindictive, Grant as manipulated, and Evan and Lorna as well-meaning people caught in a painful family drama. This is not fraud, he told the jury. This is a family that fell apart. And the state is asking you to criminalize the messy, complicated reality of family relationships. Don't let anger and hurt feelings turn everyday family dynamics into felonies. Patricia's closing was simpler. The defendants told lies, she said. They told Grant that Nancy was having panic attacks. That wasn't true. They told him she was crying about money. That wasn't true. They told him she was too proud to ask for help. That wasn't true. They used those lies to get $54,000. They used that money not to help Nancy, but to pay off debts and make purchases. That's fraud. That's theft by false representation. And it's a crime. She paused, looking at each juror. The defense wants you to believe this is just a family disagreement. But families don't lie to each other about mental health to get money. Families don't systematically remove a new mother's financial independence. Families don't take money meant for medical expenses and use it to pay off credit cards. That's not family. That's fraud. And these defendants need to be held accountable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Nancy waited in a small conference room with Grant and Tom, watching the clock, trying not to think about what happened if they lost. If Evan and Lorna walked away from this, if all the testimony and evidence and months of preparation resulted in nothing. "Whatever happens," Grant said quietly, "you did the right thing." Nancy didn't answer. She wasn't sure she believed him. At 4:47 p.m., Tom's phone buzzed. "They have a verdict." The walk back to the courtroom felt endless. Nancy's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, willing herself to stay calm, to not show the fear and uncertainty roiling in her chest. The jury filed in, their faces neutral. Nancy tried to read them, tried to find some hint of what was coming, but saw nothing. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. "On the charge of theft by false representation against Evan Rourke, how do you find?" "Guilty." Nancy felt something release in her chest. "On the charge of fraudulent misrepresentation against Evan Rourke, how do you find?" "Guilty." Evan made a sound, half gasp, half sob. "On the charge of theft by false representation against Lorna Rourke, how do you find?" "Guilty." Lorna sat perfectly still, her face a mask. "On the charge of fraudulent misrepresentation against Lorna Rourke, how do you find?" "Guilty." The courtroom was silent. The judge thanked the jury and dismissed them, set a date for sentencing, reminded the defendants of their bail conditions, and then it was over. Nancy sat in her seat, not moving, barely breathing. "Nancy." Grant touched her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. "Let's get out of here," Tom said gently. They walked out through the side door, avoiding reporters, got to Grant's car, drove back to the house in silence. It wasn't until they were inside, until Nancy was sitting in the familiar living room with Grace asleep in her arms, that she let herself feel it. Relief, vindication, exhaustion, and something else, something like peace. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human behavior. She read through the pre-sentence reports, reviewed the evidence, and looked at Evan and Lorna standing before her. "This court has heard significant evidence about manipulation, deception, and the exploitation of family relationships," she said. "The defendants abused trust in a fundamental way. They lied to a father about his daughter's well-being. They took money meant for medical expenses and used it for personal gain. They showed no remorse throughout the trial." She paused. "The harm here goes beyond financial. The defendants undermined Nancy Caldwell's autonomy, her independence, her ability to make informed decisions about her own life. That kind of harm is difficult to quantify, but very real." Evan's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client is a young man with no prior record. He made mistakes, but he's not a hardened criminal. He asks for leniency, for probation, for chance to rebuild his life and relationship with his daughter." The judge looked at Evan. "Mr. Rourke, do you have anything to say?" Evan stepped forward. He looked thinner than he had at trial, worn down. "Your Honor, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I made terrible decisions. I hurt people I love. His voice broke. I just want a chance to make it right, to be a father to my daughter, to prove I can be better." The judge's expression didn't change. "Ms. Rourke, anything to add?" Lorna stood straight, her hands clasped in front of her. "I was trying to help my son. That's all. I never meant any harm." No apology, no admission, just justification. The judge made notes on her papers. "Mr. Rourke, you are sentenced to 18 months in county jail with work release eligibility after 6 months. 3 years probation following your release. Full restitution of $54,000 plus interest. Mandatory financial literacy and parenting classes." Evan swayed slightly. His attorney put a steadying hand on his arm. "Ms. Rourke, you are sentenced to 12 months in county jail with work release eligibility after 4 months. 3 years probation following your release. Joint and several liability for restitution. mandatory financial counseling. Lorna's face went pale but remained composed. This court takes fraud seriously, the judge continued, especially fraud that exploits family relationships and targets vulnerable individuals. The defendants will have time to reflect on their choices and their consequences. Hopefully, they will emerge with better judgment and genuine remorse. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Nancy watched as bailiffs approached Evan and Lorna, watched as handcuffs were placed around wrists that had pointed fingers at her, had controlled her, had counted her father's money. Evan looked at her across the courtroom. His eyes were pleading. She looked back without expression. Lorna didn't look at anyone, just walked out with her head high, as if this were happening to someone else. In the hallway outside, reporters clustered. Nancy pushed through them without answering questions, Grant clearing a path with his bulk and his stern expression. They got to the car, drove back to the house. Grant made dinner. Nancy fed Grace. They ate in comfortable silence. How do you feel? Grant asked eventually. Nancy thought about the question. Tired, she said honestly. Relieved. Satisfied. Sad, maybe. Sad. That it came to this. That Evan couldn't just, she stopped. I don't know. Be honest. Be better. It shouldn't have been this hard for him to treat me like an equal partner. Some people can't see women as equals, Grant said quietly. Lorna certainly can't. And she raised Evan to believe the same thing. I know. You gave them chances. More chances than they deserved. I did. And now they face consequences. Nancy looked down at Grace, who was making small sucking motions in her sleep, dreaming of milk. Now they face consequences, she agreed. 1 year later, Nancy walked along the St. Croix River on a clear autumn morning. Grace was almost 2 now, walking on chubby toddler legs, stopping every few feet to examine a leaf or a stick or a bug. Mama, okay, Grace said, holding up a pine cone. I see it, baby. It's pretty. They'd moved into their own apartment 6 months ago, a small 2-bedroom in downtown Stillwater, within walking distance of Nancy's office and Grace's daycare. It was modest, but it was theirs, paid for with Nancy's salary and free from any taint of Evan's control. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago. Evan got supervised visitation every other Sunday, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. He was living with his sister in St. Paul, working construction, paying restitution from his meager earnings. Lorna had been released after serving 8 months. She'd moved to Wisconsin to live with a cousin. Nancy had heard through Tom that she was telling anyone who would listen that she'd been wrongly convicted, that Nancy was a vindictive woman who destroyed her family. Nancy didn't care what Lorna said. She cared that Lorna was no longer in her life or Grace's. Grant walked beside them now, carrying a small backpack with snacks and extra clothes for Grace. He'd been wonderful this year, supportive without being overbearing, helpful without being controlling. He'd learned his lesson about being manipulated, and Nancy had learned to accept help without feeling diminished by it. She looks like you, Grant said, watching Grace chase a butterfly. She has Evan's nose. But your determination. Nancy smiled. Yeah, she does. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, Grace running ahead and coming back, exploring the world with the fearless curiosity of a toddler who knew she was loved. Do you ever regret it? Grant asked eventually. Pressing charges? Nancy thought about the question, about the trial, the testimony, the months of legal battles, about watching Evan and Lorna led away in handcuffs, about the nightmares Grace had for weeks after Nancy had been too stressed and Grace had picked up on it. No, she said finally, I don't regret it. Because they deserved it. Because it was the right thing to do. Because I couldn't let them get away with it. Because, she paused, watching Grace bend down to smell a flower. Because I needed Grace to grow up knowing that you fight for yourself, that you don't accept being controlled or manipulated or lied to. even by people who say they love you. Especially by people who say they love you. That's a hard lesson for a child. Life is hard. I'd rather she learn that from me in age-appropriate ways than learn it by being someone's victim. Grant nodded. You're doing a good job, honey. With all of it. Nancy felt her throat tighten slightly. Thanks, Dad. Grace ran back to them, her hands full of dandelions. Mama! Flowers! Beautiful flowers, baby. Nancy took them, tucked them carefully into the backpack. Should we go get lunch? Yes. Sandwich. They walked back toward the car, Grace between them, holding both their hands. Nancy thought about Evan in his jail cell, counting down days until work release. She thought about Lorna in Wisconsin, bitter and unrepentant. She thought about the 18 months that had passed since she'd given birth to Grace in that hospital room and discovered the truth about her marriage. She didn't forgive Evan. She didn't forgive Lorna. They'd made choices, deliberate, calculated choices to lie and manipulate and control. And Nancy had made sure those choices mattered, had made sure there were consequences. Some people might say she should forgive, should move on, should let go of anger for her own sake. But Nancy didn't want to forgive them, didn't see any reason to let them off that particular hook. They'd hurt her, lied to her father, tried to trap her in a life of dependency and control. They could live with knowing she remembered, knowing she'd fought back, knowing she'd won. Mama happy? Grace asked, tugging on her hand. Nancy looked down at her daughter. This fierce, curious, determined little person who would never know what it felt like to be controlled by someone who claimed to love her, who would grow up with the certain knowledge that she could fight back, could demand honesty, could hold people accountable. Yeah, baby, Nancy said, squeezing Grace's hand. Mama's happy. And for the first time since her wedding day, it was true. She was happy, not because everything was perfect, not because the past year hadn't been hard, not because single parenthood was easy or justice was certain, but because she was free, free from lies, free from manipulation, free from the constant need to shrink herself to fit someone else's vision of what a wife should be. She was free, and Grace would grow up free too. That was worth every moment of the fight. That was worth everything. Nancy Caldwell walked along the river with her daughter and her father, carrying dandelions and watching butterflies, living a life she'd fought for and won. Behind her was a marriage built on lies. Behind her was a year of legal battles and testimonies and hard truths. Behind her were two people sitting in jail cells, facing the consequences of their choices. Ahead was a future she'd build herself, honest, independent, free. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.